Hello friends, welcome to this video where we're going to be diving into my submission for the Tableau DataDev Hackathon from this May 2021. And the project topic that I dove into was how do you pause and unpause workbooks and data sources. So the big challenge here is that you do have a REST API endpoint that allows you to pause and unpause schedules. By the way, this project lets you make use of that in a easy to use way. But if you were to look at the various functionality available to you in the REST API, you do have that ability to update the schedules. You do not have that ability to update individual tasks or tasks associated with a specific workbook or data source. What you can do is you can delete tasks and you can add workbooks and data sources to schedules, which generates tasks, but there is no concept of saying, I want to pause this thing temporarily. So what this project does is, in a fancy way, it's going to allow us to just point to a workbook or point to a data source, and we can say, I want to pause this thing. And then the REST API and the metadata API in the background are going to go to work for us, and they're going to figure out what are the extract refresh tasks associated with this thing that you want to pause, and let's temporarily delete those tasks, but let's save the information about those tasks so that once you're ready to unpause them, we will just cycle through all that stuff that we deleted and we will recreate it. But first, let's start out with this easier scenario where some of the lucky ones out there, you might have thought ahead, or you just got lucky, and all of the tasks that you want to pause all exist on the same schedule. And that schedule, if you were to pause it, is not going to impact other things that you don't want to have paused. So this is a kind of niche scenario, but since you can pause and unpause schedules using the REST API, I figured why not throw this in? It's easy enough to put in the project. So with that said, let's dive into seeing this thing and how it works. So for starters, we're looking at our schedules. These are the schedules on my server environment. By the way, pausing and unpausing schedules is only something you're going to be able to do in a Tableau server environment. If you are using Tableau online, then just close your ears, close your eyes for the next minute or so, because you can't really modify your schedules. So we see this schedule here, Devix test weekly. Let's go ahead and look at the code where we are going to pause this thing. So we're going to come back here. We're going to see that instead of having this next run on some date and time, it's going to be disabled. So we come out here to the code. By the way, if you want to get access to all of this code, just come out here to GitHub, look up my name here, Divinorum Web, and then this repository is Tableau Extract Refresh Hackathon. So you'll get all of this code, and then all you really need to do to make this work for yourself is go into the sample Tableau environments file here under config, and just turn this into, instead of a sample, turn it into your environment. So you would want to put in your personal access token or your username and password and all of the relevant information. Then rename this into Tableau environments instead of sample Tableau environments. And I'm not going to crack this guy open and show you it because it has all my secrets inside of it, my passwords and whatever. So then we can come out here to this main file. And in this main file, I have a bunch of lines commented because we're going to be running through it in this demo. But for starters, we have uncommented this line, which is saying we've defined a schedule runner, and we are going to just call on this pause schedule method. After we go through the demo of showing you how this all works, I'll actually give you a sneak peek at what is a schedule manager, what is extract refresh task manager. But for now, all you need to know is these are things I built for this project that make it easy for us to make the REST API do what we want it to do. So we want to pause this schedule. The schedule name is Devix test weekly. So let's run this. Let's see what happens. So for starters, we're going to get a response here. That is all of the methods that we use here when we're pausing or unpausing. They all return the actual response that we got from the server when we made the request to pause the thing. So if you wanted to, you could build your own processes around this code. And if you don't get the correct response code, then you know that something went wrong, and you don't want to you don't just want to run this code and then say, all right, it's all done, the thing is paused. You want to be able to check and see, is it actually paused? So this makes it easy for you to do that. And let's go take a look at our results. So if we come over here to schedules and we refresh this, we're going to see that my next run is disabled. All right, so we paused that schedule. By the way, when I say pause and unpause for schedules, what I really mean is suspend and activate. That's the actual terminology in the REST API reference. But the way that normal humans think about it is pausing and unpausing. So now if we wanted to unpause it, it's as easy as saying unpause schedule and then giving the schedule name that we want. So let's go ahead and run this. Let's see the results. We get that valid response. We come out here, we refresh our browser, and we can see, all right, we're back in business. So as I said before, schedules are the easy use case, and this is probably not a real world scenario you're going to be in where you have a super clean environment where you can get away with pausing an entire schedule. You know, you might have 200 different workbooks running on a schedule, and if you just want to pause one of those workbooks, pausing the entire schedule is not really going to do the trick for you. You need to isolate that one workbook and pause its stuff without impacting all the others. So that is where we get into this, the real core of what this project is doing for you. So let's try to run this line where we are using our extract runner to pause a workbook. And we're going to point this, this method to a workbook name that we've defined up here. That workbook name is Hackathon May 2021. So before we run this code, let's take a quick look at Hackathon May 2021. Understand this thing a little bit. This is a workbook that I created with the intention of demoing. So I put a combination of embedded extracts and published data sources as connections for this workbook. So I named them accordingly as well. So we can see that there should be two embedded extracts that we will be pausing and unpausing. But then published data sources are a little bit trickier. So when we look at the extract refreshes for the workbook, we're going to only see two of them. And these are the two ones that are the two tasks that are related to our embedded extracts. But if we are querying our extract refresh tasks, I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but basically when you query your extract refresh tasks, you see the workbook ID it's associated with. But what you don't get is information about some upstream data sources that workbook also depends on, which is why we lean on the metadata API in this example, where we can, in this project, where we can query all of our workbooks and all of their upstream data sources. And this is going to give us information about the upstream data sources for our workbook. What it is also going to do is it's going to tell us if this thing has extracts. So let's go ahead and run this. And we can find down here, now we have this information about, does that upstream data source actually have extracts? Now in this case, if we go back to where we were looking at this workbook, you can see that one of these I have is a live connection, one is an extract, which is why when we query the upstream data sources, we end up seeing one of these has extracts, one of them does not. So why am I telling you all of this? Well, let's go ahead and run this one line of code and let's find out. For starters, you'll notice I get this error. Surprise, surprise. I knew this was going to happen. I have two workbooks with this same name on my site. So while you can point to a workbook by name, if you have multiple workbooks with the same name, you are going to want to use the unique identifier for the workbook. So if we look at the different arguments you can pass in, you can see that, yeah, workbook name is an optional string you could pass in, but you also have workbook ID. So if you have multiple workbooks with the same name that live in different projects, which is not as crazy as it sounds, sometimes you have a development project and you have a production project, well, now you can just call out that workbook by ID. I happen to have looked up my ID ahead of time, so I have it up here. But if you have no idea how to get your ID, check out some of my other tutorials, other YouTube videos where we work with workbooks, and you're going to see that we make use of the Tableau API Lib library and its querying functions to easily retrieve information, including what your workbook IDs are. So we can run this new line of code, but we also have this include upstream flag that I've set to true. So what does this mean? It means that in this case, we're specifying that we do want to pause this workbook and we want to also pause its upstream data sources. If you set this flag to false, you're going to pause the workbook, but only its embedded extracts. So you'll leave upstream data sources alone. Why might you want to do that? Well, you might have a published data source that connects to dozens of workbooks, and you don't want to pause all of those workbooks. So you don't really want to pause your upstream data source. All you want to do is pause that specific workbook. So this gives you the option to do that. Let's see what this looks like when we set this to true, and then we'll come back. We'll do it again when we set this to false. So let's go ahead and run this after looking at all of our tasks. So if we look at the tasks that currently exist before we pause tasks for our target workbook, you're going to see that we have a bunch of them, and we have 2 that are directly related to Hackathon May 2021. And then I'm just going to point out that up here we have some other ones which would not be obviously related to the workbook, but they are upstream data sources for the workbook. So when we run this, we are going to wait a little bit, and then we're going to get some responses that are going to indicate to us that we have deleted some tasks. So let's go out and let's look at this task list now. When we refresh, we can see that we've kind of cut that down a bit. We no longer see any tasks related directly to that workbook that we targeted, and those upstream data source tasks that I had called out before, they've gone away as well. But what happened when we did that? Remember, this whole project is about pausing and unpausing extracts, but recall that that doesn't really exist. What we've done is we've deleted the tasks and then we've stored information about them. So if we want to see some information about our workbook extract refresh tasks, this project goes ahead and writes those tasks that are paused to a CSV file. Now you could write this to a database if you wanted to. You could put it in any other storage of your choice. I've gone with a CSV because it's very easy to do in a demo project. And then we can also see I have some upstream data source tasks that are paused. In this case, we are pausing tasks for a workbook, so we're not going to see any tasks here for a data source specifically because we have paused things for an upstream data source, and we treat those differently. In any case, if we want to unpause these tasks that we just paused, all we have to do is run this line of code that says unpause workbook, and then we point to that workbook that we want to unpause, and we say include upstream yes, and then we run this, and we're going to wait a second so that this thing can process, and then we're going to come out here, refresh our tasks, and we're going to see everything's back in business again. All right, so let's do that again, but this time let's set this to false. This include upstream flag is now false. That means that we are pausing our workbook and we are not pausing its upstream data sources. So if we run this, we are going to wait a little second to get our responses. You'll notice here that I got 2 responses where last time we ran this, we got 4. Okay, so if we refresh this, we're going to see that I got rid of my workbook's embedded extract refresh tasks, but those upstream data source tasks still exist. So now we can just go ahead and unpause our tasks before we move forward. So just to, I'm going to go ahead and set this to true. case I push this back out to the code base. So now let's just verify that you could actually call a data source out by name. We've been focusing on the schedules and then on the workbooks. But yeah, if you do have a data source that you want to pause, extract, refresh tasks for, you could do that as well. All you have to do is call it out by name. And so we can also see you could call this out by ID. So just like with the workbook, if you happen to have a data source in different projects that had the same name, you could use that little trick of passing in the local unique identifier, and then you're going to be all good. In this case, I just have one data source under this name. In my case, I'm using this BigQuery extract1 as a data source I want to pause. So let's go ahead and run this. We wait a little second. We see our responses. Why am I getting two responses here actually? This is because I took the same data source and I added it to two different schedules. So I had it running on multiple schedules. So when I pause this data source, it's going to go out and it's going to delete both of my tasks for both of those schedules. So if I come in here, before I refresh, we can see, all right, we've got two of those tasks. Now we refresh, those tasks are gone. Now we come back in here, we run the unpause data source line of code. And when we come out to our browser, we should see those tasks existing again. So that's in concept, that's really simple, right? You're pausing extract refresh tasks for a specific workbook or a specific data source. Then you're coming back, you're saying, I want to unpause those. And it's a bit scary maybe at first because you're saying I'm going to delete my tasks entirely, but there's nothing to worry about because we always log information about those tasks that we're deleting so that when the time is right and we want to unpause those tasks, we just point to the information about what tasks we previously deleted and we reconstruct them. So that's the end of the demonstration. You could just leave me here to talk by myself if you want, but we are going to really quickly take a stroll into what is making all this stuff work. And I am leaning on the Tableau API Lib library to make all of this happen. That's what's allowing us to very easily interact with the REST API as well as the metadata API. And so if we take a look at one of these things, like the very first thing we used here was schedule runner. So what is schedule runner? Well, if we come down to this utils area of this project, we can see we have some different managers. And schedule manager is a bit of code here that's going to fetch our schedules information. So the Tableau API Lib library has some functionality that we place in this area of the library called querying, and that's going to allow us to not even have to mess with the REST API endpoints directly. Instead, we can just say, I want a pandas data frame filled with all the information about my schedules. And then we get that, and we can filter down to just extract schedules, and then we have all the information about our schedules. So if we want to pause a schedule, we simply point to the schedule we want to pause, and then we run this update schedule endpoint, which, this update schedule method, which uses the Tableau REST API's update schedule endpoint to modify a schedule. In this case, all we want to do is set that schedule to suspended. And then if we want to unpause the schedule, we do the same thing, except we set that schedule to active. So I'm not going to go through every bit of code here, but you have, just like you have a schedule manager, you have a data source manager, you have a workbook manager, and those are kind of helper utilities, which are going to feed into this extract manager, which is really the core of all the code that we have here. And this is how this is where we write the logic for, all right, we are creating extract refresh tasks, or we are deleting them. And when we want to pause a workbook or unpause a workbook, all that logic lives inside of here. So I'm showing this to you so that you have an idea of where you would reach into in this project's code base to take some of this logic and integrate it into your own environment. Finally, this task logger class This is something I put here so that you could continue using Task Logger in the same way that I use it in the core functionality of the code, but you could abstract this logic for writing extract refresh tasks to pause. Maybe you don't want to write this to a CSV file like I've done. Maybe you want to write it to a database. So you could just build upon this logic and even use the same function name if you wanted to, but have this instead of a write to CSV option, you could write it to something else. Same thing goes for reading, information about those extracts that you've paused and that you would like to unpause, etc. So if you have any comments, questions about anything that you've seen here, feel free to leave a comment on the video or reach out to me. You can find me anytime out in the Tableau DataDev Slack channel. So if you have no idea what DataDev is, go check out the Tableau developer program. You could even get yourself a free Tableau online site. And if you want to really be cooking with gas, check out visstack.io. This is a service that I'm using to host my Tableau server environment, and I don't have to worry about upgrades. Basically, like in Tableau Online, you have an environment that's managed for you. You never have to worry about upgrading anything. But in Tableau Online, you don't have control over everything. You can't create your own schedules. There are certain endpoints, REST API endpoints that you can't use. You can't create new Tableau server administrators and stuff like that. So what you could do is you could use a service like visstack.io, and they manage that service for you. So it's basically like hands off in terms of you managing it. You don't have to, it's just like using Tableau Online, but you get all the full functionality of using Tableau Server. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope that this demonstration's been useful for you, and maybe this topic of pausing and unpausing extract refresh tasks is something that's been a pain point for you and doesn't have to be anymore. So this is the project that I made for my hackathon submission, and I'm looking forward to seeing what everybody else made. So until next time, catch you later.